This time we're talking 80s horror. As always, sometimes it was an easy pick, sometimes almost impossible. And yes, you probably won't agree with every choice, so drop your own list in the comments. John Carpenter's The Fog is a stylish, slow-burn ghost story that still works today. Set in the coastal town of Antonio Bay, the film follows the townspeople as a strange, glowing fog rolls in on the eve of the town's centennial, bringing with it the ghosts of a leper colony wronged 100 years earlier. Carpenter's ominous synth score, the steady direction, and the coastal visuals create a creeping sense of dread that builds with each scene. Sure, it has its plot holes and some logical leaps you just have to accept, but that's part of its charm. The jump scares still land, the atmosphere still pulls you in, and the story feels timeless in the way it mixes local legend with supernatural horror. John Landis' An American Werewolf in London is one of the rare horror films that balances genuine scares with dark comedy, and it still holds up decades later. The story follows David, a young American backpacker who, after a night on the foggy moors, is attacked by a creature and soon realizes he's turning into a werewolf. The film's blend of humor and horror keeps it fresh, but what really makes it stand out is the groundbreaking practical effects by Rick Baker, including what is still the best werewolf transformation ever put on screen. It's a film that shifts from funny to genuinely terrifying with ease, set to a perfect soundtrack that keeps the tone sharp. And after watching it, you might never feel comfortable walking alone in a subway station again. No doubt, 1982 belongs to The Thing. John Carpenter's reinterpretation of 1951's The Thing from Another World takes the core idea of an isolated team facing an alien threat and turns it into a masterclass in tension and paranoia. Kurt Russell leads a strong cast. The film features incredible practical effects by Rob Bottin that still hold up today, and the creature is genuinely terrifying, with each transformation more unsettling than the last. The Thing is one of Carpenter's best films, perfectly capturing the isolation and paranoia of its setting while delivering genuine scares. Decades later, it remains a reminder that horror doesn't need cheap jumps to be terrifying. Sometimes, the fear of not knowing who you can trust is enough. This could have been Videodrome, but that one already took its place in my 80s sci-fi list. So here we have Cujo. It might not be the first film you think of when you hear Stephen King adaptation, but Cujo delivers a level of white-knuckle tension that still holds up. The story is simple. A mother and her young son are trapped in their car during a heat wave, while a rabid Saint Bernard named Cujo stalks them from the outside. The film's power comes from its claustrophobic focus, forcing you to sit with the mother and son as dehydration, heat, and fear close in. There's no supernatural villain here, just a very real, very deadly threat. Cujo may not have the iconic status of other King adaptations, but it earns its place through sheer, relentless tension. A recent video on the channel covered the best horror movies of 1985, but if just one had to be picked, it would be Re-Animator. Stuart Gordon takes one of Lovecraft's most straightforward stories and turns it into an over-the-top, gore-soaked horror comedy that could only have come from the 80s. Freed from the challenge of visualizing Lovecraft's usual cosmic horrors, Gordon leans into the tale's mad scientist energy, following Herbert West as he obsessively tries to bring the dead back to life, with messy, hilarious, and often horrifying results. The film fully embraces the excess of its era, blending splatter-heavy zombie chaos with dark comedy that pushes everything to the extreme. Jeffrey Combs is perfect as Herbert West, playing him with a mix of arrogance and obsession that keeps the film grounded even as the reanimated corpses return in increasingly violent and absurd ways. Re-Animator may not feel like typical Lovecraft, but it captures the author's sense of madness and grim humor while carving out its own place in horror history. David Cronenberg's The Fly is body horror at its most tragic. On the surface, it's a remake of the 1958 sci-fi classic, but Cronenberg transforms it into pure horror, grounded in a deeply human story. Jeff Goldblum plays Seth Brundle, a scientist who accidentally fuses with a housefly during a teleportation experiment. Gina Davis plays Veronica, the journalist who falls for him and tries to save him as he slowly loses himself. Beyond the gore and practical effects, The Fly is a parable about the loss of identity, the fear of disease, and the disintegration of love under the weight of something neither can control. It's terrifying, but it's also heartbreaking, showing Cronenberg's skill in turning horror into a story about what it means to be human. This British horror classic is as unsettling as it is unforgettable. Clive Barker's Hellraiser dives into pain, pleasure, and the thin line between them, introducing audiences to the now iconic Pinhead and the Cenobites. Hellraiser is brutal and often hard to watch, but that's part of what makes it effective. It offended many when it first came out, but Barker's vision created something that feels unlike anything else in 80s horror. Chuck Russell's The Blob is a remake that outdoes the original. It flopped in theaters but found its audience on home video, thanks to its practical effects, dark humor, and a clear love for the genre. The story follows a small town under attack by a goopy, ever-growing blob that dissolves everything in its path. It's packed with practical gore effects that still look impressive, capturing the 80s obsession with creative kills and practical creature work. The Blob also plays with the teen horror tropes of its time, laying groundwork for the self-aware horror that would define the genre in the 90s. A family moves to a new home in New England and discovers a pet cemetery nearby, with the power to bring back whatever is buried there. It's a perfect setup, mixing what people love most with what they fear most, and Pet Sematary leans into that fear without flinching. Stephen King wrote the screenplay himself, making this one of the adaptations he was most satisfied with. It might not reach the heights of The Shining or Carrie, but it holds its own with a grim, unshakable atmosphere. The film has its flaws, with odd flashbacks and characters making questionable choices, but it delivers some of the most genuinely horrifying moments in 80s horror. The Zelda scenes alone are enough to stick in your mind.